How do we grow this influence of black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy-making structures?
Get to grips with the digital environment, put together best practices, what works and what doesn't, very importantly.
In the project that we're doing in Chatlat, we've created a linking bridge between those two little areas there. So it becomes a matter of just 10 minutes walk from one side to the other.
So my message to our CEOs and those chief investment officers is, where at the end of the day do you want to see your role?
So by treating all of our water back to a stage where we can bring it back into the process, we're in effect saving around about 35% of our water usage on site.
Hey guys, welcome back to another show of Youth and the Green Economy. Today's conversation is about environmental activism. So to help me out, I have my special guest, Dr. Julie Goodness. Welcome, Julie.
Hi, Nolwazi.
Hi, how are you?
Well, and yourself?
I'm good, thank you. So today you're going to be helping us, and I'm sure you're going to be encouraging the youth to partake in environmental activism. So before we get there, may you please just briefly tell us about yourself and what you studied, and how do you actually define yourself as an environmentalist?
Sure. I'm currently a postdoctoral researcher at University of Cape Town in the Global Risk Governance department. And I guess you could say by training, I'm an environmental scientist, and particularly I'm interested in urban environmental issues and urban sustainability. And my focus is both on the social and the ecological. So this is how people live together in their environment. So my PhD was in sustainability science, and then I have a master's in environmental science.
And then earlier on, before the show, you spoke about your undergraduate bachelor's degree. May you please also just tell us about that?
Yeah, because for sure. So I think like a lot of young people can relate when you're suddenly faced with the decision of what you're going to do with your life at 17 or 18. It seems like a huge choice. And at the time, I was interested in both science and kind of literature and reading. So when I went to school in the US for my undergrad, and so there you have the opportunity to take a bunch of different things. So I ended up doing a degree in both biology, and I did it in a very like hard science kind of way. I worked in a molecular biology lab, and I worked on fruit flies and their genomes. So this was like deep lab work. I was in there using a microscope every day, and it was quite an awakening to the scientific process, which was cool. But I definitely decided that that kind of micro work wasn't for me. I wanted something bigger and broader, which led me more to environmental science. And then also to keep that kind of literature part of my brain, I did a dual degree. So the second half of my degree was in English and American literature. So it kept me sane amidst the lab. So both kind of sides. So it's an interesting background. But yeah, led me to my later choices and what I would study and do.
Mm-hmm. And then would you define yourself as a activist or environmentalist?
Yeah, where do you put yourself? I definitely think that's important. And I would say as a scientist, I've kind of had to grapple with where do you sit in the activist space. Because I think in your training, you're told that being a scientist is all about being objective and you're completely removed from any kind of biases. But of course, we know this is untrue. We're people living in the world, and we have histories, we have backgrounds, we're all different, and we bring who we are as people to our science, you know, even from the choice of what we're choosing to study. So I think that kind of dichotomy is a little bit of a falsehood. And for me, the way I've worked through it is that the environmental issues are so pressing these days, and there's not time to wait. We can advocate for our science, but we also need to be making positions and decisions about how we publicize that information, who we share it with, and how it can make real change. So I think in that kind of way, activism is very important, and working towards transformation and the kind of change you want to see in the world, because you study things a lot and you probably have good recommendations about, at least slightly informed recommendations about possible ways to go forward.
And then, so you said you're an activist, then my question is, what is your personal end goal? What are you trying to achieve in the end? Like, what would you like to see?
Yeah. For me, I guess foremost, it's creating a little bit more of a sustainable world and a more environmentally conscious world. I think the issues that we face are huge. It's hard to say that you're going to have a personal effect on climate change. That's like a big thing, but we can make choices, I think, in the work that we engage in and the way that we do things. And it's important to pick issues that are important to you and the ways that you think you can make personal change. So for me, this has been through being involved in community organizations that are involved in environmental work. One issue that's pretty close to my heart is urban gardening, whether that's for food or for biodiversity. So that's one way that I try to get involved and promote groups and activities that focus around that.
And then when we talk about, because we know that a lot of the youth are not really participating in, activism, why do you think that it's important to also encourage youngsters who are still trying to make their way, or anyone who is environmentally conscious? Why do you think it's important for them to actually partake in these organizations that provide activism?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's such a wonderful way to learn and expand your horizons and get new knowledge. I know environmental organizations that I've volunteered in or worked in, like I've just learned about different environments. Like when I first came to Cape Town, I was learning about what is Fynbos, what is the ecology of Table Mountain or the Cape Flats or these different places. And I met people and their different environmental challenges. So I think you learn a lot, number one. You have a chance to learn how to community organize and work with people, which is invaluable. And it makes you kind of more clued up and able to navigate in the world when you have those kind of opportunities. So yeah, volunteering or getting involved is a great way to learn about yourself, your environment, and your community and how you can have impact.
Oh, okay. And then you spoke about urban farming. What are some of the organizations that you can mention for us where maybe, for instance, I want to join in and also help out?
Yeah. Well, one really interesting thing, I know we've all been kind of figuring out what are our lives during pandemic and post-pandemic, and a lot of things have changed, right, for ourselves and in the world over the past year. So I was thinking about how do I want to be involved going forward, and like what are the big challenges that it looks like are emerging in Cape Town. And I think one of the first things that we saw going into hard lockdown last year was a knowledge that a lot of people were going to be really food insecure. Suddenly they wouldn't be able to go to work. Their jobs were on hold or terminated, and that kind of flow of income into the economy wasn't going to happen. So people were actually going to be going hungry. And it was really interesting to watch the response for me unfolds in Cape Town from a kind of community organization and grassroots standpoint. So I think you saw people really coming to the party to offer food relief, vouchers, volunteerism, time and hours. And one thing that I became fascinated with was the emergence of community action networks in Cape Town, which have sprung up by neighborhood. And if you're interested in checking that out, there's a Facebook page called Cape Town Together. And yeah, you can find it or search community action networks in Cape Town. And there's a bunch of different literature and links that will come up. But I found that a really interesting and rewarding place to get involved and start to find ways to volunteer. And that's like everywhere in Cape Town, all different neighborhoods. So I started working in the Sea Point can, which is paired, all the cans are paired with a different neighborhood in Cape Town. And Sea Point's sister can is Guguletu. So this is a place where I didn't have much experience and like didn't know many people there, but through this work got connected. And people are doing community gardens in Sea Point, but they're also doing community gardens in Guguletu. So this was a nice way to make that bridge. And one really awesome organization there that I've had the opportunity to learn from and grow with over the past year has been the Guguletu Urban Farming Initiative, Goofy for short. You can also look them up on Facebook. And they're just spectacular. Their mission is to green Guguletu by creating one kind of community garden at a time and hopefully turn Guguletu into a food forest, which I think is pretty rad. But this is not the only example. There's other groups that are doing urban farming like this across. Oh, yes, there we go, Cape Town Together. This is all across Cape Town, that these kind of initiatives for people to create their own food under the kind of umbrella of the threat of COVID has started to emerge. So yeah, it's a really cool space. And I think there's a lot of different urban farming initiatives like starting up. So that's one great place to start, but talking to your neighbors and other organizations on the ground is another great way to like get a foothold in, I think.
Mm-hmm. And then when we spoke about, so you being like, so this show is actually for youth, right? And then, so I want to ask you, as the older environmentalist, what would be your advice for us young people who are still trying to navigate, and, is kind of clueless about how we can navigate within the environmental industry?
Yeah, and I mean, don't write it off as just a young person problem. I think like we're always trying to figure things out and like what is our most useful next move or like ways to give back. Like what's the kind of work we kind of want to do? So that's a question you ask throughout your life, but it's definitely a good thing to get started with when you're young. So if you're involved in a degree program, I think there's often quite a few resources that you can take advantage of for internships or finding ways of connection to people and try to get like on the ground experience. I know when I first came to Cape Town, I worked with the municipal environment department, so City of Cape Town environmental department, and that was a great experience. I learned about how people run nature reserves and what are the ways that people do biodiversity conservation, how are parks landscaped, that kind of basic thing. And again, it was a chance to learn about like the social side of things, but also the environmental side of things. So I'd say, try to find connections to organizations that seem interesting to you. And don't be afraid, even if you're not in a degree program, like finding a community connection or a group in your neighborhood that sounds interesting, like just start with that. You can cold call them, visit them, email them. And often like volunteers are really welcome and sought for. So just trying to get some experience under your belt is a great way to start. But also read, like look at things online, try to like just soak up a lot of different things. The opportunities are broad, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And then with youth participation in environmental activism, would you say that there is a difference between a developing country such as South Africa and a developed country such as the US?
Sure. I actually, the thing that I found here that I thought was great was the level of, I guess, independence and sometimes ability to run with things that you can do here. Like when I started working in the environment department, I found they'd be like, okay, you're interested in that? Go ahead and like research it or do this. And that kind of thing was really exciting to me. I was like, wow, I feel like I have a lot of leeway, power, like ability to go and do something. Whereas I think sometimes in like maybe a more rigid structure of a like the States or Europe, like where, you know, I've studied and lived, like you wouldn't be given as much of that like power immediately to go out and be creative. So I'd say here, like take advantage of that. There are the problems are big, but people might be willing to trust you more to be able to do something with that. And I also feel like there's a strong energy of interest in youth here. You know, from Youth Day to beyond, there's a kind of magic, I think, about young people that people are excited about. So yeah, that's something to go on as well.
That's very interesting. Actually, I didn't know that in South Africa, a lot of young people are very interested in that. But then when we talk about environmental activism, what would you say is currently the biggest issue that we are faced with?
Woo, okay. I mean, I think I have to say climate change because that's the biggest one. But I also think one that at least has become more important to me over the past year, especially with kind of the specter of like racial violence in the US, is like environmental equity. And also through COVID and effects like this, is how environmental impacts can affect people disproportionately. And we want everyone to have greater access to, you know, safe environmental resources and to be able to live lives of health and well-being. So I think that's a thing that we see a lot now and has become a really important issue. So that's something that I've tried to keep focused in my work and my activism, is how do we create, a more environmentally sustainable and environmentally rewarding Earth, city for all people. So that's something I try to keep as a through theme in the work that I do.
Okay. And then this is just going to be general, right? So you don't have to be in depth with this, but then a lot of people actually don't know how COVID has had an impact on the environment. So what's your take on that? How has it changed the way, you know, the environment is currently?
Well, I mean, I guess it's changed. For me, I think it's changed, obviously, the way that we socially interact in a big way, and the way that we engage in research. That's a big one. I think over the past year, like I've had to restructure the way, you know, like here we are in a digital platform interviewing, like, so that's a way that's changed my work, is I do a lot of it more digitally, even though I'd like to be more on the ground and meeting people face to face. So I think it's a challenge for, that kind of like tacit people-based environmental work. That's been a challenge. And then I guess in terms of urban sustainability, it's made us rethink how we use space and how we design our cities. So of course, this is not the last time we're going to see an environmental challenge like this. So are there different ways that we can design our cities better? I think so. You see things maybe more open air, creating more space for people to be outside. And like from the engineering of buildings and beyond, for how we make them safer for a kind of COVID time. So at least from my frame, that's the way COVID has reshaped the environmental work that I do.
Okay. All right. Okay. I don't know. I think I've asked you a whole lot of questions for today's show.
Sure.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that you did urban. What's that about urban?
I guess some of my training has been in like urban sustainability, and I would say like urban social ecological systems was what I looked at in my PhD. So for that work, I was examining how people shape their urban environments through gardening. So I was looking at private residential spaces. So like your backyard garden, what do people put in it? Like, and why, what kind of plants are important to them. So like, almost like an ethnobotany kind of perspective, but like what is important to people. And in a Cape Town perspective, there's definitely food. And so that I think led me to do a lot more work on food and urban gardening. And then also this amazing local biodiversity that we have in Cape Town, and people really value that. So I did the perspective from fieldwork in Cape Town, but then my degree was also in Sweden. So I did a cross comparison with how people garden and think about their environments in Stockholm as well, which was interesting because people are also concerned about food there, but there isn't this kind of pressing conservation biodiversity issue there. So that one doesn't like have as much.
And have you worked with other African countries, or has it just been in South Africa?
Let's see. So I guess I would say in a very like light kind of way. I was involved in a book project about, let's see, ecosystem services, urbanization, and trying to figure out how urbanization is affecting environments over the next like 30 to 50 years. And one perspective that we looked at was through environmental management in African countries. So we convened a meeting with different environmental managers from different African cities and asked them what their challenges were and what they're trying to do in an environmental management sense. So that was really eye-opening in terms of challenges faced across the continent, which are largely related to, I guess, human resources, like ability to have staffing and what they want to do, and often just rapidly growing cities and being able to plan on a time scale and geographic scale that meets this giant urban challenge. So that was really insightful and added to a new layer of knowledge to something that I previously didn't know about.
And then with African countries, which country do you think that you would really love to work with,
Oh gosh. Let me see. Beyond this, I of course love South Africa and Cape Town, and I think I'll continue to work here just because I've had, I guess, like 10 years now of like off and on experience. So I think it's really worthwhile to get to know.
Ooh, I think we lost her. Well, that was exciting. I think we all learned something from Dr. Julie. Goodness. Let me just see if I can contact. Yeah, you guys can also just search on volunteering organizations that you can join in, and I think we have to encourage young people and everyone basically who wants to join in on environmental activism that can help us, especially in South Africa. I think we need a lot of young people to participate.
Brilliant conversation that you both are having, but I think from the technical side, we've got Julie back. We got Jilly back from a technical flight. This is what we do when we go live. I've got so interested in all the questions. Nolwazi has been asking so many questions. I even in the private chat went and asked a question: are the little laws good enough that we have at this moment? That was one question I even posed from my side. But I'm going to leave it to the two of you. The wind blew you one side, but we have you back.
Yeah, sorry about that. And just to finish off your question, I think I'll continue work in Cape Town, but one really cool opportunity I had was to work with a organization called ICLE, and they ran this program called Urban Natural Assets for Africa, and that worked with a bunch of different cities within African countries, and that was an amazing experience to get perspectives from Dar es Salaam, from Malawi, from Ethiopia, and it was just like a really cool experience as well. So we met great partners through the local government in different cities that were involved, and it would be awesome to continue to reach out and work with them. So maybe I'll use some of those connections in future work, which would be fabulous.
And then to answer Byron's question about litter laws, do you think they're good enough?
I actually don't know much about litter laws within Cape Town or South Africa, so I guess I don't know. I couldn't necessarily say, but maybe I think you also have to ask, like, what are the sticks and the carrots? So it's like, is a law enough to prevent people from actually like doing something? You might have to say, is there an incentive that we can offer? So like maybe if we clean this up, then you can get some kind of like reward or redemption. And it's also, you have to look about the larger ecosystem of like, why is litter happening? So maybe it's not the law, it's some kind of social situation that you need to address that's like a little higher in the food chain, not just the law.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and then to close the show off, I do have a question about environmental activism. Are there different types of environmental activism, or is it just one thing? Or how is that actually?
Oh, gosh, yeah, I think there's many. So you can choose to get involved from many different pathways. So I would say, are you the one out there on a protest line? Are you waving a flag? Is that the kind of, like you want to be like in the face of, people you think should be hearing this message? Are you more of a, someone that wants to work behind the scenes on documents or doing research? Like that's another form of activism. Are you someone that, wants to take the slow time to become involved in an organization and, maybe like if it's an urban gardening one, you work on building a garden, you work at bringing volunteers into it. So there's that kind of activism too. So I don't think there's a one type fits all kind of situation. And you really want to focus on what you feel comfortable with and what you think your strengths are, and maybe that's the good way to think about what makes me feel good from an activist perspective and go with that.
And then one last thing.
Sure.
What's your advice for people who want to join in on activism? Would you say that you have to, what are the challenges, like main challenge that you would get as an activist?
Let me see. I think getting into an organization is probably, not so hard. I think it's talking to people in your community. I think it's like doing some research about the kinds of organizations or issues that are, important to you. And so there, I think it's like, do you want to work at a more kind of like neighborhood level and scale where you're really involved, or do you want to be in government? Do you want to be in a huge NGO? Like work with WWF or Greenpeace? Like there are many different like levels to get involved, or that you can choose to get involved. So yeah, just kind of starting out and finding which ones are interesting to you, seeing if they have a volunteer program, or just writing to someone, being daring, being like, I would like to do this. What opportunities are there? Whether it's, some people can do it without stipends, but often seeing if there's like a way to be compensated for your time as well.
All right. Thank you very much. It was so lovely to have you on my show.
Oh, such a pleasure.
Hopefully some other time I'm gonna have you again. I think we learned a lot today. And
awesome.
There you have it, guys. That is another episode of Youth and the Green Economy. Please do join us next week Friday as we're gonna have another interesting topic. Thank you very much.
How do we grow this influence of Black leaders, men and women, that can represent our industry inside the ANC, inside the policy-making structures?
Get to grips with the digital environment, put together best practices, what works and what doesn't, very importantly.
In the project that we're doing in Chaplat, we've created a linking bridge between those two little areas there. So it becomes a matter of just 10 minutes walk from one side to the other.
So my message to our CEOs and those chief investment officers is, where at the end of the day do you want to see your role?
So by treating all of our water back to a stage where we can bring it back into the process, we're in effect saving around about 35% of our water usage on site.